Well, hello. This is Franz Gilbert, and first of all, I want to congratulate you and encourage you right off the bat for considering taking the PHR test and continuing to grow in your career in human resources. A little bit about me, real quick. First and foremost, if it sounds like I get way too enthusiastic about HR, it's because not only am I an HR practitioner and been doing it for many, many years, but I also love HR. It's also my hobby. And so, during the day, I am very blessed to work at an amazing company practicing human resources. And then, as part of my hobby, I've been equally lucky to be a blogger, speaker at conferences, and most recently, I've now sat on a number of standards committees to include the International Standards Organization. And I also hold my GPHR. So, been doing lots of HR for quite a while, and that knowledge has led me to the conclusion of whatever I can do to help more people enjoy HR and pass the test, the better. So let's talk about certification, because let's make no bones about it. Going for your PHR is no small endeavor. The test costs a lot, and and if you haven't taken it, I'll go ahead and tell you the test is really, really hard. Probably the key thing is certification's worth it. And so I just want to encourage you to give you an idea. On LinkedIn, there are over 1 million professionals that list themselves inside the HR function. That's a lot of professionals. Now, within that, just to give you an idea, SHRM has about 250,000 plus members. And right now, there's only 73,000 PHRs in the United States. So, conservatively, 1 in 10 HR people have their PHR. Now, the question is it worth it? And what I can tell you is, being both in the HR profession and also the data shows that having your certification means something. There are some other certifications out there that you'll hear people use, and you're like, I don't know what that means. I don't know if they bought it. Is it from a Bohemian university or something? But people in the industry, and especially people in HR, know getting your PHR, SPHR, or GPHR means that you really not only know your stuff, but you've done it. So PayScale did a salary survey, and what they're finding is approximately a $20,000 salary difference for those with their PHR and those without it. So aside from the accomplishment of getting your PHR and the accomplishment of those around you will really understand the credibility you bring to the table, hopefully over your career you also see that from a compensation perspective you get rewarded too. Now, I mentioned before the test is hard. Let me give you some idea of how hard. The pass rate on this thing has been, less than 60%, for almost every year since it's been created. What you're seeing on the screen is the pass rate for the last 2 years, and one, a lot of people don't pass this. Now, realize, and there's not research on this. But taking the test is not cheap, right? This is not a test that you plunk down a ton of money for, don't study, and you show up the day of and just try to blind take this. So realize that for the most part, these pass rates are with people similar to yourselves who want to try hard and are taking a really hard test. And so you need to study understanding that. And so I strongly encourage you, take seminars, take classes, do flashcards, do whatever you need to do, and study the way that makes sense for you, because this test is hard to do. The other thing is, set expectations for those around you that this test is hard, and it may take 1 or 2 times for you to pass the test. And it's not a poor reflection on you. It really is a reflection on the depth and breadth of the material that you're going to be covering. And so let's talk about that a little bit. So the HR Certification Institute lists out, there's 7 different areas of knowledge that they test on. So you've got business management and strategy, and that's corporate acumen. It's, do you understand financials? Do you understand risk and reward? Do you know how corporations are kind of structured? The second is workforce planning and employment. It's kind of an interesting way of basically saying the recruiting function. So they take you from workforce planning to hiring the person. You have human resource development, which that knowledge area covers the training section. You have compensation and benefits. You have employee and labor relations, which I think are self-explanatory. Then they have risk management, which is kind of a catch-all area for policy, immigration control. There's a lot more in there than what you would consider risk management. And then there's a section of core knowledge. And that section takes some key principles from all of the above and makes sure that you cover them. So every test is a little different in terms of certification between the PHR, SPHR, in terms of where it spends its time. So the pie chart here is showing you the amount of the test that's focused on each one of those areas. So if you look at like employee and labor relations, it's like 20% of the test. If you look at workforce planning, it's 24%. Business management is only 11%. And risk management's only 8%. So from a study perspective, this gives you an idea of where to focus your time, which really is on the classic HR functions that you would consider. So the actual test itself, once you schedule it, you'll go in and it's 175 questions. Now, 150 of them are scored and 25 are for future tests. Now the reality is you're not going to know which ones are which. You may hit a question that seems very, very contemporary, that's focused on a legislation from this year or the previous year. Odds are that may be a question on the future test. And what they're doing, and this is where the HR Certification Institute does a really good job, is they put these questions in there to make sure that they're fair questions. They look at what everyone's score results are and change the question accordingly. Before they actually become real questions. So you get 150 questions that really are scored. The test you have 3 hours to do, and the passing score is 500. Now, the reality is you're not going to be able to tell how the score works. They use a thing called the Angoff scale. If you want to look it up on the internet, it's ANGOFF. But think of it this way. Every question is weighted based on what they think the percentage of people are that should pass it. So an example, if a question is about what does FMLA stand for, that question probably has a really high weighting because everyone should know what the FMLA is. If someone asks what the Bradford equation is, probably very few people will know what that is, and so 10% of the people may know, and so they'll weight that question accordingly. Again, I'm oversimplifying the Angoff scale, but it'll give you some idea that it's kind of difficult to know whether or not you pass. Now, kind of here's the good news and the bad news. The good news is at the end of the test, they'll ask you, are you sure? And they'll ask you twice. On the end of the test, are you ready to submit it? And then once you hit submit, then it'll calculate the answers, and then it'll tell you whether you passed and failed right then and there. So you don't have to wait for the results. You'll know whether you passed or failed. So that's the good news. The bad news is I will go ahead and tell you that's an incredibly stressful moment because you're like, okay, am I really, really sure? Am I ready to hit the button? And then a couple weeks later, you'll get the breakdown score showing you how you did on each one of the concepts. Some techniques for the test. One is take your time. There is no rush. You've got 3 hours. You're going to go through, you're going to hit some questions that you know the answers to. But here's a great way to increase your odds when it comes to multiple choice questions. And you may have heard this before, but it's a great tip that, candidly, my wife taught me because she's got an education background, and it turned out to play out really, really well. One is, in a multiple choice question, eliminate the distractor. There's always a really wrong answer in there that just has nothing to do. It's usually, out there. Look for that one and cut that one out. The second one is usually there's an answer that sounds really right, but if you look at it, it's usually the right answer to another question, and it usually has nothing to do with the question being asked. And then that now narrows you down to 2 answers, in which case you can eliminate the wrong answer to the question that you're working on. So let's give you an example. So if one of the questions was, what is one of the key aspects of FMLA? You can look at this and you can go, okay, I've got 4 choices here. 30 days of paid leave, 12 weeks of unpaid leave, reasonable accommodation, or subsidies for farms. Well, the distractor in this one right away is subsidies for farm. So you can scratch that one out. Now, when you look at this and you go, okay, now I've got 3 left. Which one of these is a right answer, but it has nothing to do with FMLA? And that would be reasonable accommodation. Reasonable accommodation applies to the American Disabilities Act, not the FMLA. But the test writers know that you've got reasonable accommodation being pounded in your brain somewhere for in preparation for this test. So scratch that one out. Again, a way to think of it is it's the right answer for the wrong question. So now you're down to 2, which is 30 days of paid leave or 12 weeks of unpaid leave. And in this case, the answer is 12 weeks of unpaid leave. So I created 2 products that try to help people pass their PHR test. And the first one we're calling Flash Tweets. It's kind of an innovative use of flashcards using Twitter. I saw a lot of people at work that were trying to prep for the test, and either A, they were having difficulty logging into the SHRM site, or they were self-conscious about logging in at work, and others folks were just conscious of walking around with a stack of 200 flashcards. And I thought, wouldn't it be cool if on your phone you got tweets? And so what we do is we send out the question as a tweet, and then a couple minutes later we send out the answer. So not only do you get the question and answer, but here's something that's really cool because of Twitter is you can embed a link. And so I make sure as part of the answer, you get a web link to documentation that helps you. So going back into the FMLA example, if the question was, the tweet would be, what does FMLA stand for? The answer tweet would come back and say Family Medical Leave Act, but it also would have a link to the Family Medical Leave Act frequently asked questions. So if you're going, okay, I know that, but I'm still a little fuzzy, you have a quick way to study guide. And again, the price on that is $14.99 for 6 months. I thought that would be a good amount of time for people to prepare and study for their test. The second set of products are comprehensive DVDs. These are our example. This is an example of that. There's PowerPoints with the voiceover where I try to explain the key concepts. Again, the idea is having fun. You're going to be under enough stress. It doesn't make sense for me to add to it. I want to make this as easy as possible for you, and I'll walk you through the key concepts, the definitions, and ways to understand HR. I do take my time because I'm not going anywhere, and you can hit pause as your time meets, so I don't feel in a rush to try to speed through something. So I want to make sure you get it. And the other thing I did is, unfortunately, as mentioned, the fail rate on this test is kind of high. And so people come back and they may find out they only were hurting in one area, let's say compensation and benefits. So if you go to the website, you can find that you can pick the entire set, or for $20 for each DVD, you can turn around and pick the subject area that you want.